Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Passion Institute podcast. In the last 12 months, have been running a number of wellbeing programs and retreats for doctors and physicians. And I wanted to share some of those lessons with you and what has actually occurred. So, for those of you that are tuning in, welcome, that are new, and thank you for those people that are listening in. Burnout is something that I've been really interested in for a very long time, partly because I had burnt out in the corporate space. Even in running my own business, particularly through the COVID period, there were elements that felt like that I was at that burnout point. And so now I work with sort of, I guess, high achieving professionals, leaders, and entrepreneurs. And in the last 12 months, this has been one of the kind of areas that have been running some wellbeing programs. And the idea was to really help doctors with around not only just their well-being, but if we break that down in terms of looking at their balance in more detail, what their purpose is, looking at their resilience, in the careers and perhaps what stages of their career they were also at. And so as I share some of these lessons, and if you are not a doctor or a physician, you might think, oh, is this episode, relevant to me? But it's kind of really relevant to people that are feeling perhaps on the edge of that burnout, or perhaps some of your people or somebody in your family might also being able to do that. And I wanted to kind of, talk about the healthcare profession and some of the challenges that have actually occurred. And why is it that some of us in our senior leadership roles as entrepreneurs, why is it that this particular group was also so vulnerable to burnout? And again, what I'm about to share with you, it's very evident that this happens for a lot of us at senior leadership roles as well. So, people that, do very long hours, that have got to make decision making all the time. And, we hear this notion of decision fatigue, that you have to make these decisions over and over again. And particularly when you're perhaps working those long hours, that we don't have the right mind, haven't had enough rest to be able to make the best decisions. But often those, decisions are very high stakes. We're dealing with people's lives at times. And there's a lot of not only physical load of patient care, but there's that emotional load. So one of the things that I noticed is that when you've got that emotional load of patient care, then it becomes really interesting, because your worry, your care for your patient takes that toll on your emotions as well. And so as a result of that, often what I found in my experience that there was often this neglecting of self-care. There was often not enough space and time for reflection in terms of what it is that was working, what was not working, and more importantly, the decisions and actions you were going to take to be able to shift that as well. And the other experience that I got was that all of these people were super passionate when they started. And again, this might relate or resonate with you, that when we start something, we're really dedicated to the cause. We direct a lot of our energy and time and even money, but it hits the point where our passion and our energy and our love and our giving that we've been doing for all of this time feels completely drained. And often it feels like that there's not much more that you can actually do. So again, it's a bit difficult to cover 12 months of a program, as well as, a number of retreats, both in Australia but also overseas. I ran one in Bali, in Ubud earlier this year, and I learned so many great things. And one of the things that I've learned that I wanted to share with you in this podcast is that small rituals matter. Sometimes the rituals don't have to be a 40-minute of this or 60-minute of this. Sometimes the rituals can be as simple as 1 minute. So, for example, I shared with all of the different doctors, both at the Wellbeing retreat as well as in the retreats, was that how do we take 1 minute? So, between seeing a patient, are you able to just become aware of your breath and taking them through 5 or 6 different types of 1 minute breathwork rituals? And you could pick the one that you wanted. Sometimes you picked one where you had to let go of the last patient, particularly when some of the news wasn't great and that was trying to take an emotional weight on you as you finish with that. Secondly, sometimes, look, there's not enough time. I wanted to know more, and even letting something like that go. Thirdly, there was another way of saying, well, how do I now get ready and give them the same energy as I did to my first patient at the beginning of the day that I do to patient number 14, well into the day. So we talked about these small 1 minute rituals. And one of the things that 1 minute rituals can do, they don't have to be just breath work or a quick meditation or visualization. You might think other things. You might jot something in your diary or your journal. You might go for a quick walk. You might stretch your muscles. Whatever it is that you do for a minute to really reset it. The second thing we talked a lot about was how do we actually create a space for reflection? So not only a space for reflection, but how do we also create a safe space for reflection? What does that mean? Well, where are the forums that people can actually share things with each other? Where are they talking about what stresses them without feeling judged? Where can they talk to other colleagues about what's happening for them? And sometimes the colleagues, by speaking to them, are either going through something similar or they have an opportunity to be able to share some wisdom because they were in that situation a while ago. And so that part was really interesting, particularly when they ran the Wellbeing program and a number of doctors then dialed in for regular sessions. And we had these, I had these sessions on a fortnightly cadence. It was amazing how much they learned from each other and how many experiences they could share with each other about the fact that they'd gone through some similar challenges in the past. And that was making it, a lot more difficult for them in terms of what they needed to do. So, so that was really interesting in terms of being able to create that and to be able to do that. Another really interesting lesson that came out of it was the fact that we have to get a leadership buy-in. I know that initially when I spoke about this with this program with a couple of people, there were a couple of people that were very, very interested and very, very well understood well-being and the impact. And they knew that if we could even prevent one doctor from burnout as a result of this program, let alone many, what the impact that organisation could have. But that doesn't mean that we had the right people in the room for that engagement. And so it took a little while to get that happening. So if you are a senior executive or you're a doctor or you're an entrepreneur that feels a little bit on the edge of burnout, unless it's your own company and you can make those changes, sometimes it's a little bit challenging to go, well, I see what the problem is, but the solution requires a level of engagement with many people in my organization. And how do I actually set a strategy? How do I go about getting that stakeholder buy-in so that when the time comes to be able to implement a program like that, I've got the right people on board? And so that was really important. And the other thing that, in leadership is that it doesn't matter what we say, it's what we do. And so the people that are working with us, for us, are constantly watching us. And so the conversation also needed to be had with the people that wanted to run the program is, that's great that you buy into a wellbeing program for the doctors, but what about the fact that you also need to model the wellbeing behaviours? That you can't just be talking about it, but you also need to be doing that. So we also talked about the cultural alignment between some of those leaders and what that actually means. Peer support networks, whatever industry that you're in, is so important to improve your resilience. As one of the programs came to an end, I remember a couple of doctors saying, oh my God, this has been the best thing for me. This has actually allowed me to step away from a number of other things, and I feel quite isolated in what we do. And what happens at senior leadership levels? The same thing. How many people can we talk about some of the work challenges that we're having? We have teams, let's say that challenges with your manager or one-up supervisor. Who are we speaking to about it? And entrepreneurs are the same. Like, unless we're connected into some sort of a community, it makes it very difficult to be able to speak about what's happening. And that in itself causes a lot of stress and an inability to be able to work on your well-being. The other thing that's really important is that we need to measure impact. And, how do you measure impact? Well, it's so important to be able to track the engagement, look at the energy levels, even look at the satisfaction in terms of perhaps one particular area that people didn't know very much about to improve their well-being, and maybe a couple of others that they did. So, for example, self-care was a pretty big part of one particular month, and there was a lot of different science and data, but also some strategies that I taught on that particular part. And so, how do we actually track that to be able to sustain some of those programs? Because, as the saying goes, what you can't measure, you can't achieve. And so, just making it really clear how you're going to track that and to be able to do that. Some of my personal reflections around running a wellbeing programs is that it really always, when you're doing this sort of work, it's pretty transformational work. It's fairly deep work when you're listening to highly educated, highly smart people who are struggling with things, particularly in their industry, that they think they should be able to manage, but they can't. And so letting them know that it's okay, it's a very common thing, becomes a really important part. So it taught me to really listen deeply, honor the fact that these are very smart people and are struggling, adapt quickly when I thought that that direction of that particular program wasn't going very well. And how do you actually bring the energy and fun into some pretty somber topics in terms of what you needed to do? So it was about balancing this strategic piece, the frameworks. But for me, in the work, it's also about that human connection, because when you have that, then you're able to make some changes and support people very differently. And so I guess this podcast is really about, if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, start small. Whether you're a leader, an executive, or a doctor who might be tuning into that, start with a little ritual, ideally daily rituals, even if you just start at 1 minute a day. It's only 7 minutes in a week. That's only 365 minutes in a year. And so having it diarised, start connecting with your peers, start connecting with different communities so that you're able to talk about some of the challenges and don't feel shame in sharing with people what it is that you're actually going through and what it is that you really want to do. And, the goal isn't to survive in healthcare. It's really to thrive. And what does thrive look like? Well, it looks like you stay connected to your passions. You stay connected to the deeper purpose of the work that you set out to do, and putting yourself through a lot of study and a lot of exams and a lot of continued study. Doing things that are really meaningful in your life and making sure that you're able to stick to that. So if you're thinking about joining a health wellbeing program or attending a retreat, or you're thinking of running one in your organisation, just ask yourself some of those questions. And it always starts with learning to ask for help, learning to acknowledge that there is some things in there that you want to improve, but more importantly, that it's something that you want to do. Thank you for tuning in. Continue to work on your health and wellbeing. For me, I haven't shared this with many people, and now I'm coming out to a very public forum and sharing it. But I had a health scare last month, and it's been interesting to, look at the word healthcare and health scare, and the only difference between those two words is the letter S. And my name starts with S, Shivani. So, that was the difference, that for me, I experienced a health scare, and it certainly started to let me think about my own healthcare, what I could do to be better, but also help other people that do extraordinary work around. Thank you for tuning in.